Reactive training systems.
I got a question about the role of the off-season for a powerlifter and how individuals' training should be different during the off-season. But I have to ask the question first, when does the off-season begin for a powerlifter? Why would the off-season begin for a powerlifter? Powerlifters' goals are typically to increase their strength on the 1 rep max for the squat, bench press, and deadlift. So when would the off-season come into play? And powerlifting meets happen all year. You can compete whenever you want. Every 3 months you could probably find a competition. The USAPL is growing so fast that you could find a competition probably every single month within your region without much difficulty. So that requires a question of when would the off-season start? And this is incredibly individual. It's not as simple as the off-season is in the months of December until May. Powerlifting just goes on forever. It's kind of like hockey. So when you're talking about off-season, you have to ask, why would the off-season start? Some of my lifters have off-seasons because they just want to slow down their progression. They want to just mentally take a break from the highly competitive mindset. And that's where mindset really does become important. If you're mentally fatigued because you've been competing over and over and over again for the last 5 years, then maybe your off-season is every 5 years because you need a mental break around every 5 years. You need a six month to a year break. So the question is really good, what to do with the off-season. But the issue is that assumes the off-season is yearly. And I would argue that most lifters don't have a yearly off-season. If you've been following RTS for a while, you know that we have been implementing the emerging strategies. We have developmental blocks and we have washout weeks. So the developmental blocks could be considered on-season and the washout and pivot blocks could be considered off-season. But those are only usually 2-3 weeks long. So I wouldn't really consider it off-season, but the point is it's hard to define if you don't know when it starts, because it's not going to be the same for everyone. Everyone's going to have a different off-season. And let's get into more of the practical stuff. What do we do during an off-season? So let's say that somebody decides they need to take a break and they want to start an off-season. Well, then that's where the input from the lifter comes into mind. It's always important, but it depends on really what they want to do. And the off-season enjoyment should be prioritized more than anything, in my opinion. If they want to do lower intensity lifting, that's usually the first place we start. Powerlifting is pretty high intensity, can be quite draining, so the off-season can be considered more like bodybuilding style work. And when I say bodybuilding work, I don't necessarily mean that you can't build muscle when you're doing on-season work, but the intensities are lower, the exercise selection is a lot less specific. Instead of doing all barbell movements, maybe you implement a lot more dumbbell movements or even machine work. And that is really dependent on the individual too, on what they prefer, when the off-season starts, and what the lifter wants, what the off-season means for the lifter. If that means they want to do CrossFit, or they want to start doing more general preparation work, they want to start hiking more, they want to have more of a social life, you know, they are basically taking less sacrifices. And I think that's kind of the importance. That's what an off-season is. Personally, I've taken 2 years off of mentally attaching myself to my performance in the gym because it was a requirement for me to get over a chronic hip injury. There are many things that might happen to us as we go through our powerlifting careers, and certain things might trigger a necessity for an off-season, or even just to take a step back from the sport itself and come back when we're ready. Powerlifting is all about the long run, and if we're drilling a high intensity, high frequency, high stimulus training for years and years and years, we are bound to need a change. And for the off-season to work, you need to make sure you're adapting to that. Instead of, like, your strength might go down for a while in your competition movements if you move away from them. But it's better to train than not to train. It's like building a house. If you put brick after brick after brick, building your house, it's almost complete. and then you stop working on it completely, and you don't touch it. You leave it alone for 3 years. That house is not going to be in the same position that it was when you stopped working on it. There are going to be trees that start growing, there's going to be vines and weeds, and you're going to have to do a lot more work to rip apart all of the stuff that has grown on the structure to make it buildable, so you can build on it again. That's kind of like training. If we stop completely and we leave it alone for a while, you're not going to be in the same place that you were when you started. You're going to be at a lower place, and you're going to have to rebuild further. So the off-season, a successful off-season allows for a good starting point when you get back to normal training. So you don't lose too much strength where you're so demoralized and demotivated that it's difficult to get back. But you're enjoying training, you're enjoying what you're doing, and you're putting yourself in a really good position for the long run to avoid burnout and completely quitting the sport overall. I hope that was helpful for you guys. I hope that was informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.
Reactive Training Systems.